Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webcast. When will we learn how to do learning? Sponsored by GoOne. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and can be submitted for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and type them there. And please note that the chat is turned off for this session, so you can only use the Q&A. A new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please be sure to complete it as soon as the webcast is ended. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to GoOne for the presentation.
Hi, and welcome everyone. Thanks for that, Esther. Appreciate your time today and appreciate GoOne's time today. My name's Jackie Eakin. I'm VP of Talent Solutions at ADP, and that really covers performance comp, succession learning, and also our TMBC, Marcus Buckingham Solutions engagement and standout. So it's my pleasure to be your host and facilitator today with GoOne. We actually work pretty closely with GoOne across the board, and we have an esteemed amount of panelists and guests on our call. But before I jump in on introductions and the day, I wanted to share a little bit more about how we came about today. GoOne and ADP are both HR vendors. We've been participating in a relationship partnership for the last year and a half or so. Barnaby is from our GoOne partnership. But what I wanted to share is we had some dialogue early on, and we were talking about the trends in the market. So we said, when will we learn how to do learning? Well, we were discussing some of the market trends around return to office and how do we engage our employees, and that skills and competencies are becoming very, very critical and part of the forefront of the market today. And as we started to discuss the trends, we said, what would be better than to be able to share this with some thought leaders, because it's so critical. Many of us got into the HR industry because we had a passion around talent, around people. And this is our time. Our time has arrived to be those thought leaders and to help our talent and our employees to really be enabled and empowered within our workforces. So with that, we wanted to have a real conversation on the market trends today around learning and engagement and how critical it is for our businesses to stay on top of it. I say this post-COVID era, but we're not quite there yet as far as the post goes. I feel like it's going to be ongoing for a while now. And so we wanted to extend this to you. So no slides today. This will be, I promise you, the only, well, one of two slides that you will see because of slide fatigue. I think we're ready to just have real conversations around what's happening in the market. So we've invited a few guests to participate. So in this conversation today, you're going to hear from a series of folks from various parts of industries, whether it be telecommunications, medical products, professional services, and you're also going to get a lens from the vendor perspective as well around learning and engagement and our strategies around how we move forward and progress in this environment. So with that, I'd like to have our guests go from left to right and go ahead and introduce yourself, starting with Christian Gomez.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jackie, for having me personally, and thank you all for joining and spending a little bit of time with us. My name is Christian Gomez, and I lead strategy at the Marcus Buckingham Company. And our focus is on what we would refer to as helping leaders and organizations turn talent into performance. And that really encompasses all things from the employee engagement, that employee experience, over to the leader experience. How do we equip leaders to be able to go and provide value and create that environment where our employees can thrive? And then finally, just the creation and being able to scale high-performing teams. How do we create intact teams that are able to create a culture of high performance within an organization? And I also work very closely with the ADP Research Institute so that we can continue to leverage the insights that they're gaining from the world's biggest people laboratory at work. And then how do we bring that back to leaders like yourselves, to organizations, so that we can go and apply those best practices. And I'm joining you all today from Miami, Florida. Pass it over to Lou.
Hi, I'm Lou Tederick. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm the Chief Learning Officer for Verizon, and in that role, I support all of our 130,000 employees, as well as another 100,000 outsourced partners, indirect resellers of Verizon. So a really large learner population, from functional training to leadership development to talent initiatives like tuition assistance and educational assistance. So turn it over to Sam.
Thanks, Lou. Yes, a pleasure to be on this panel today. My name's Sam Rogers, the Global Learning and Development Technology and Analytics Manager for Convatec. maybe not a medical device manufacturing name that you've heard of, but for the products that we produce, people live because of them. And working in a very regulated space, it's one of the most regulated industries that there is. We sell our products in over 100 countries, global organization with 10,000 employees spread across 40 different countries. There's a lot that goes on with learning and development, and we're always doing our best to meet the needs of our people in a very diverse kind of environment. Oh, and I'm coming to you from Utah in the US today. Over to Carrie.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Greetings, everyone. I am absolutely delighted to be here too. I am Carrie Fleming. I'm presently the Chief People Officer at Mazars USA LLP, as you can see here from the slide. For those of you who aren't familiar, we're an independent member firm of Mazars Group with a footprint of over 46,000 globally. We're professional services, as Jackie had mentioned, and we service a very diverse client base in areas of audit, tax, and advisory. Essentially, in my role as a teacher connector standout model, I see Christian stand on the back of his wall there. I apply those roles to be the chief steward of the entire people experience at our firm. And it's a responsibility I absolutely don't take lightly, not the least of which focus areas is learning and development and that constant learner mentality. So again, I'm delighted to be here today for this very, very important conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to Barnaby.
Thank you. Also excited to be here. I'll start with where I am. I live near Seattle, but happen to be in Dublin, Ireland today. So I'm glad to be joining from the other side of the world. I am the Chief Technology Officer of GoOne, where I have the privilege of leading product design and engineering to build out our learning platform. And that platform is backed by, I think we believe, the world's largest library of e-learning content for employees. We have over 1,000 companies as customers with millions of learners on our platform who are able, and we're actually we're started in Australia, but now have a global footprint and really cover all industries, professions, and our footprint is global. And we look to really help employees everywhere be more successful and happier in their roles. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for those introductions. Hopefully we've got the Brady Bunch screen, short two heads, but that's okay. But now I have had the privilege of meeting all of the panelists today over the last couple of weeks. Truly a dynamic group. For those of you that aren't aware, even Lou Tederick was voted 2021 CLO, the CLO of the year, which congratulations. So we have such a powerhouse of thought leaders on this call coming from all angles, whether it be the learning management side of the house, CHRO side of the house, technology side of the house, vendor side of the house. So this is going to be a really dynamic session that we have ahead of us. And over the past few weeks, I think they failed to share that we've had all these overlapping relationships with Sesame Street, Romper Room, Ohio State, and maybe that's a faux pas right now because they're not at the top of the charts like we had hoped, or at least that I had hoped. So spoiler alert, big Ohio State fan. But so happy to be here today to get some insights and just understand a little bit better about our industry and what we're facing and the challenges. So that actually introduces some of the first topics of our discussion. We wanted to open up, since we have such a vast amount of industry and span of resources from various groups across many businesses, we wanted to ask our practitioners or our leadership team some thought leadership questions around learning and engagement. And the first one is, because we are in this hybrid environment right now, we're seeing more than ever the need to accommodate talent, skills, competencies, et cetera. I'm sure these are falling across many of your challenges that you're facing. So with that, I'd like to ask Lou, Carrie, and Sam to answer this question for us. As you're faced with these new challenges, has this also fueled your key initiatives in regards to learning and development? So why don't we go ahead and start with Lou?
Yeah, absolutely. This has changed learning and development in a couple of ways. I mean, we now have a whole curriculum on how to lead teams remotely, lead distributed teams as we come back into hybrid workforce, or we have parts of our business that will continue to be worksite based, some that will be home-based, and then some will be in hybrid roles. So that's created like a whole new set of skills that are required, use of tools to make it all work. So that's been a major initiative that we've had. And then I think, skilling has been on the forefront for the past few years, but we have seen a tremendous need to really hone in on upskilling our talent to support business transformation initiatives. And this would be regardless of the current state of affairs. We are continuing to focus on transformational initiatives that will drive growth in our company, help us on the talent engagement side. So we're supporting those initiatives. And then I think one of the things that we've also been focused on is career development for employees. And that has become an even greater area of focus in light of the Great Resignation. So we've accelerated some of our work in that arena to help people have more transparency about the different roles in the company. We have a new job taxonomy, and we're lining up learning, specific to those roles. So I would say, if anything, it allowed us to accelerate in places that we were moving along and making good progress, but it's now a necessity to be in those particular areas.
And Carrie, are you finding the same or something similar?
Very, very similar to what Lou had shared. At Mazars, our North Star right now, coming out of this challenging environment, is, the dust is starting to settle, and we're starting to see, on the horizon, a bit of a change. It's balance. And we're finding that in the L&D agenda, as well as the other people agendas within the firm. There's 4 particular areas of relevance that come to mind when I think of that concept of balance, some of which Lou had alluded to. So we're very consistent in that regard, and others that might be subtly different. But the first is we're ensuring that balance between the level appropriate curriculum and technical and non-technical aspects. So as Lou had mentioned, non-technical is really important right now, whether it's the resiliency and the bounce back factor, emotional intelligence, mental health. A lot of these push and pull strategies for accessibility in those non-technical areas in balance to the technical components. Secondly, ensuring we've got the remote and the in-person learning environments thought out, right? And it's a planful, thoughtful strategy in preparation for when we become more comfortable being back together in person, which we hope is on the near-term horizon. Third, ensuring we've got balance between that self-paced independent learning and collective cohort learning. We don't want to lose that connectivity and that connection and community that we've missed in a lot of regards for these past several months. I hate to say years, because that's just too real. And lastly, the balance between instance learning, where we come together and we really deep dive on a topic, and a sustainment strategy like mentoring with purpose for a longer period of time. So it's not a one and done. I mean, overall, we're mindful of that in the entire experience and considering our learners as whole people, which I think we are challenged to do now, just as we are in the HR realm of considering our people even more and more and more so as their whole selves. So that's really what we're contemplating.
Yeah, and I remember you sharing about being lifelong learners and how do we incorporate that in, and this push and pull, and how do we enable that for our employees to feel valued. So critically important. And I know, Sam, from a technology standpoint, Lou alluded to this earlier, where technology, because we had to move so hybrid and remote, just accelerated it. So I'm sure you have a perspective as well.
Yes, well, working for Combitech that I work for now actually started during the pandemic. The role that I serve in now didn't exist before that. And it's accelerating us, but in the direction that we wanted to go anyway. I mean, there's been debate about hybrid learning models and hybrid kind of curriculum development and stuff for a long time, and shifting this way, and people dragging their heels, and end of discussion, nobody's coming to work. So even if they are, they can't like gather in a classroom and do the usual classroom thing. Finding ways that we could hightail it to where we've been trying to get to for a while and really be able to deliver to meet the needs of the organization currently. Yeah, we're not like post-COVID maybe or post-pandemic, but But that crisis moment of figuring out, oh no, what do we do? I think we're kind of past that part, at least hopefully we are from a technological perspective, where the ball is rolling. Being able to solve the larger issues with with what we have at hand, what we have to work with, those digital transformation initiatives, being able to take a better approach to things is happening now. I saw a question too come in on the chat, just to comment as I may. It looks like it came in for me about how we handle things like supporting vendor credentialing for hospitals. This is something that we have a lot of internal needs for our internal employee audience, but we're also needing to show validation to external governing bodies. And that all just went really sideways within the last year or two of like, who actually does govern who? In those moments of uncertainty, we have a capability to better organize, do what we wanted to do all along, ask better questions, and hopefully advocate for what we know creates a better experience for the people that we're serving.
And Sam, you alluded to something earlier too, which I would love for you to expand upon, is that you had shared that learning in general helped you to uncover some of the challenges within your business. So for instance, if someone you were enabling them to self-select on trainings. And could you elaborate a little bit more what you were finding as an organization as a whole?
Yeah, sure. Since we talked about that, I actually posted that to LinkedIn too, to get some other conversation happening there, which has been really interesting. This time a year ago, we didn't even have search capability really built into our learning technology. It was much more compliance driven, and that served the needs previously. But now we're able to serve needs even better and do more of the developmental kind of thing, giving people a career progression. What are they searching for is a critical question to figure out what are the needs of the organization. So yeah, as we were talking about a week or so ago, when someone's searching for project management courses, what can you infer from that? When someone's searching for, as I think they do often in the GoOne catalog, certainly at our company, Excel courses, what does this tell you about what they are looking for, what their problems are? And it's one thing to do a survey and ask people, what are the things that they would value if it was a course and all that kind of stuff. It's another thing to see what they actually are seeking. And when people are looking for a lot of Excel training about how to do pivot tables and stuff, they're having trouble with data and how the organization manages data. Probably there's some data model that would really help, as well as training about how to do the specific task. Project management, they're probably having problems with projects going off the rails in one fashion or another. Probably there's some things that we can surface as an organization that extend beyond just what we can deliver in terms of here's your course, but really here's the need that we're trying to help fulfill, that we're trying to surface within the organization any way we can.
You shared a lot on the trends within your company. I'm going to actually shift to another question, Barnaby, because I think this one's more focused on what you're seeing, and you're in the trenches of the learning management and learning experiences with many clients. So my question to you is, what are you seeing from your clients on the trends that are happening in the marketplace?
Yeah, well, a lot of change. It's been a really interesting couple of years, I'll say it. I think there are a few dimensions to this. One is, if we think about corporate learning or what L&D departments have done for many years, it was very focused often on things that are required, mandatory learning, so continuing education units, kind of like what people are getting today, as well as things that might be needed for security, cybersecurity training, those kinds of things. And the shift has been to a much broader set of types of learning. And so, with our library, where we cover everything from those mandatory trainings to things that really relate to efficiency and how I can do my job better. So that example of Excel, I think, is a really good one, because one of the things that's happened with people working remote is you can't just turn to the person next to you and say, hey, how do pivot tables work? That's just not an option. And so we actually, I believe I checked, and the number one course that gets consumed the most is an Excel course. But with that is more of a long tail. There's much more diversity in what's actually being consumed of the hundreds of thousands of courses in our library. And I think Lou mentioned the Great Resignation, and if you really look at the numbers, I think that gets good headlines, but I think the reality is it's more of a great transition. People are not just stopping working, they're shifting to other types of jobs and careers. And that has two impacts. It has an impact on the person who's going to a new career. Now suddenly they need to upskill and learn new things to do that new job. And we in fact, we hired someone who was a barista and went through a coding camp and is now a software developer for us. And she's doing great, but she's still in the steep part of the learning curve. So someone like that, will want to use courses on their core skill set. But it also affects the people who are left behind, right? So in many organizations, there were 2, 3, 4 people doing something, and now there's an expectation that after 2 left to do something else, the survivors, if you will, have to pick up the slack. And so they need to continue to increase their skills. And I would say part of that is how you deal with the stress of it and how you deal with the challenges associated with that. So we've seen a big uptick also in, I would say, wellness and personal growth. So we offer meditation and yoga courses and how to deal with conflict, because again, when you're stressed, you often, it's easier to get into conflict. And let's face it, a lot gets lost even in Zoom relative to that direct connection when you're working with other people. And so I think folks are struggling with some of those dimensions of their jobs, and they're turning to online e-learning courses to help them work their way through it, which I think has led to maybe the third thing I would say is it's much more continuous. I think corporate learning and development at work used to be more episodic. Maybe I go in once a year for a course, or it's quarterly. Now it's something that's kind of continuous consumption. And we're seeing much more frequency and higher number of minutes per period that people are consuming content. All, I believe, coming out of that. And it's the last thing I would say is my sense is, from some studies I've seen in my own experience, I don't think people are going to go back to the office full time. I also don't think they're going to stay fully remote. Some people will, obviously, but that hybrid in-out is going to be, it's kind of what I see emerging, and where I see some thought leaders saying things are going to go. But I think the need for continuous learning is only going to stay with us, if not accelerate.
You raised a really good point, Barnaby. I think I recently saw a study from Middlesex University, I think, where they studied 4,300 workers, where they said as long as they felt like they were being invested in and developed, they would reach their highest potentials. But 74% of them felt like they weren't given that opportunity. And this actually kind of resonates, with what I had a question for Christian on, is that cross barrier between development and engagement and retention, and how does this all kind of fit together and weave together, given your experiences, I think, on the Marcus Buckingham company, that you probably have a really good perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. That's a great point, and I believe that they're actually incredibly connected and interwoven, with engagement being at the center, where we see development as being a driver of engagement and retention as being an outcome of engagement. Now, key to be able to understand that connection, you have to understand, or at least you have to define engagement for the purposes of what you're studying. From our perspective, the way we've determined the measurement of engagement to be, or at least what it should be for you to be able to have a productive and effective engagement strategy, is to have something that's measurable and something that is trusted. And the way that we've really come to find it from a research standpoint and from a practical application standpoint, we've landed on a definition of engagement as it being the precursor to performance. What is the state that an individual, a team, or an organization is in prior to something happening, positive or negative? And that measurement that I end up deriving needs to be able to correlate to that. One of the biggest frustrations I see when I deal with organizations and their leaders, whether they're business leaders or HR leaders, is my engagement metric is not correlating to the outcome that I'm studying. I've got high engagement, yet my retention is going down. I've got low engagement, yet I have a team that's producing at the highest levels. So that's the first thing that I would say, is understand how you define engagement, and then make sure that you're measuring it as reliably as you can so that you can inform some of the other things. Now, as we look at it, it turns out that when we study engagement in the most effective way to be able to measure engagement, what we find is that the best way to measure engagement is by measuring the employee's experience. And I know that sounds like the crashing glimpse of the obvious, but there's so many different ways that we go about measuring engagement. We can ask a bunch of different questions, but if you focus your questions around if I'm looking at Sam and I say, Sam, what does it feel like to be you right now? Sam can reliably give me an answer that I can go and correlate. And if I extrapolate that to an organization with 65,000 employees, I'm getting good signal back. And now that means something. Now, if I get the measurement instrument right, and I'm measuring that the employee's engagement through their experience at work, what I start finding is pretty fascinating. The first thing that I'll find is that the employee's perception of their development in the context of the role, the organization that they work for, their job that they're performing, and the people they're working besides has a significant impact on the overall engagement. And then if this measurement instrument is really well calibrated, you are going to see those direct correlations between that and the ultimate business outcome being whether I stay in this organization or whether I end up looking to further my career elsewhere.
I think that that retention question is such a huge thing, right? That and skills and retaining talent. I mean, whether it be recruiting or bringing them in, or if it's how do we retain in the engagement existing today. You touched upon some of those metrics on how do we measure the success of it. You know, Lou and Carrie, I would love to get your perspective on that too. Is that how are you measuring success? Because it's not, learning and engagement isn't just a check in the box. They filled out the engagement survey or they took the training or they, I would love to get a better perspective from you on how that's measured across your businesses. So Lou, why don't we go ahead and start with you on that question?
Yeah, so we have a pretty mature measurement practice. And so for many of our learning initiatives where we're investing, where either the learner is investing a lot of their time or their effort, or where we as a company are investing a lot of our resources, we will look at all levels of that experience. So we'll ask for, the quality of the experience from the learner's perspective. We'll look at if there were KPIs that we were trying to drive with that experience, did we achieve them? And then we also, in many instances, look at things like promotions, movement, and turnover. And if we can compare that to a base of people who are similar but have not gone through the same learning experience. And so for many of our top talent programs, for programs where we've got very specific groups that we're targeting, even for tuition assistance, we have found people really want to grow and develop. And if you create an opportunity for them to do so, you will find that they get promoted more frequently. They have higher performance ratings or they hit their performance metrics more quickly or at a higher level. They tend to have more movement throughout the organization, and they don't turn over as the same rate as their peers who are not taking advantage of these opportunities or maybe haven't been positioned for these opportunities. So we have just based on initiatives, we'll look at KPI attainment, and then we'll also determine, is this one where we want to look at those HR, more traditional HR metrics like performance, movement, and the turnover. And then in many instances too, we'll do an ROI analysis because we've been able to monetize what those mean to our business, so we know if we've got a winner from the perspective of a future investment.
And Carrie?
Yeah, I'd love to pick up on that. And I think I'm going to speak to the folks who might be out there in the audience who aren't as mature on the continuum of the evaluative process as Lou is describing, where we aspire to be, but we're just not there yet. Certainly, what Sam and Barnaby were talking about as it relates to being purpose-driven and the relevancy components resonated, because as I contemplate this, I think that there's two ways that I would say to look through a lens in terms of evaluative against engagement and retention matters when it comes to that learning and development. And the first is, for me at least, and us, it's the way the learning impacts that individual learner's engagement and retention with the organization, obviously. But the second, and sometimes lost, at least for us along the way, has been the way in which training individuals, whether it's leaders or managers, can indirectly impact the team members' engagement and retention. And I think that's really important too. And we have to continuously focus on that indirect association to engagement and retention. So in the first way, going back, we have to understand if the learners are meeting relevant learning goals, as has been mentioned before. The learners believe they're receiving varied development opportunities that really truly fit for them. The WIFM, you know, that what's in it for me concept that we sometimes lose sight of. And the learners are challenged in ways that are important to them personally or professionally. So it is that individualistic view that's really critical, and it gets forgotten because sometimes we lose sight of that emotional response to change, and that's what learning and development is, right? It's change, and there's an emotional response to it. And the more that you can really key in on what is important to that individual, the more likely you have success, which yields a good employee experience and influences engagement and retention. If you also, what we've found too is that engaging participants in the continuous improvement, just as a public service announcement, the way the learners feel about an instructor and a topic is one thing, but truly how they can impact that learning in the moment and making it part of the curriculum, we've found, inadvertently, we tripped over it a bit, to be quite successful. They see their stamp on that learning opportunity and they see it living on and going forward, which has created, again, if we're talking about retention and we're talking about that feeling of engagement and connection, it really fosters it. If you can also give that recognition to individuals for giving those suggestions and ideas, that's another opportunity for tying in the learning to engagement and retention. The second way, as I had mentioned very quickly, which I want to underscore, make sure we don't lose sight of, is that the learning is once removed, where it's the managers or the leaders influencing perhaps the team members. And we have to, for example, if we're teaching or helping our leaders learn on emotional intelligence, that has an indirect impact or direct impact on them and an indirect impact on their teams. We have to measure it by gauging, as Lou had mentioned, some of those metrics, the upward feedback, the retention statistics of those being led, the trajectory of those being led. And one last thing I want to make mention of as kind of a rounding out point is that with all of this, whether it's from the view of the individual, the view of the indirect learning impact, we have to make room for learning. This has been a very profound thing that we've come along the way, because if we don't make room for learning, you don't have to measure it because it doesn't really much matter. It becomes one more thing, and we've seen that straw break the camel's back, no matter how incredible you craft the opportunities to be. So again, that's just my word of counsel to those of us who might be on that people experience, CHRO or HR generalist side of the house, to keep that in mind when we're working and teaming with our L&D teams or vendors or partners. Don't lose sight of that. Cramming that learning in can be detrimental. So that will have an impact on engagement and retention.
Yeah. You made a fantastic point. I think, I saw an article too recently where it shows, you've got this learning curve, and then you've learned, then it drops because you've got a learning curve that you have to achieve. Then you've got this adoption curve that comes back up, and there's so much that's kind of blurring all in between of things that can distract. And I'm a leader myself, where it comes into the fact where I'm trying to fit this all into, how does this fit into my team? How can I make this work so that they're getting the best out of the learning, adopting it, leveraging it in their everyday use and the flow of work, if it may be. But I've always struggled a little bit to some extent to what my role is in that big picture as a leader, as a manager of people. And Christian and Lou, I think you may have an addition to this when we talk about what is actually the team leader's role in all this. We talked a little bit, Carrie alluded to the team members and the team leaders, but I think that's something we can elaborate more on, is what should their role really be in providing training, providing learning, providing a listening ear and engagement for their team members. Maybe let's start with Christian on this one.
Sure. As we look at the impact, the positive impact that learning can have on the employee experience, subsequent retention, and all else, I look at it in three different categories. There's two categories that I know we talked about: the push versus pull, the things that they have to do versus the things they want to do. And then Barnaby and Sam outlined the other two categories that I look at that live in the context of pull, the ones that I want to do. And the first category I look at would be the proficiency category. The coursework and the learning that I want to go to, the Excel table was a great example, because I want to get more proficient at my job. I want to be able to raise my skill level so I can do my job better. There's another category that I would define as excellence. There are certain things that I want to be able to advance and elevate about myself that is going to apply to me and my benefit and benefit me in this job or any other job that I take in the future. Being able to, for example, elevate my understanding of emotional intelligence and how to be able to grow my emotional intelligence and apply it in the context of different situations was an example of it. An example that's near and dear to me would be the ability to be able to understand my strengths. Who am I? Where do my greatest contributions lie? And how do I bring that to life in my career and at this job specifically? When you look at that, the category that I think about is it's going to be twofold from a leader's perspective. Number one, obviously proficiency. It is my job to make sure that I'm setting up my people for success. Like you, Jackie, me being a leader is something that's always top of mind. And the first thing that a leader needs to be doing is listening, paying attention. Where is it that this individual needs that extra bit of help to be able to make sure that they're able to power through their job, but not do so in a way that drains them, in a way that allows them to be able to feel like they're contributing and they don't feel like they're overexerting themselves in the context of day-to-day work in terms of being able to get the basics down. And then the second part of that, again, through listening and understanding and paying close attention, is where is the opportunities for this individual to grow? When we look at the measurement instruments that we've designed, there's two questions that stand out to me. The first one is, in my work, I am always challenged to grow. Whenever an employee positively responds to that, you start to see a direct correlation between the outcomes that they produce. And then there's another question that actually has an exponential outcome or correlation to positive and negative outcomes. And the question is, I have a chance to use my strengths at work every day. Not all day, every day, but at least do I understand where do I live in the context of this work and where does the best expression of me live? So as it relates to the leader, number one is listening. Number two, be able to make those connections and help make them for them. So that could translate into a bunch of different activities. Don't talk to your people once a year, obviously, not once a month. Stay close to them, pay attention, align them with the work, and then be invested in their success in terms of what they need. And if you look at it from a proficiency and excellence standpoint, it just makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to bring that value forward as a leader.
And Lou, are you seeing that? How is that fitting into your bigger plan with the team leader? And I know you mentioned you have 850 L&D folks, and they have this responsibility of working with the rest of the organization. So share with me more of that perspective of what you're seeing at Verizon.
Yeah, so a couple of things. You know, when we create learning solutions, we always involve leaders and the targeted learner in the design and development so that it's really relevant to them. And then where we can involve leaders as teachers or coaches in the process, so they're fully engaged in the learning experience. And if they're not engaged there, most of the critical work that we put out involves some kind of reinforcement piece or coaching piece that leaders have to help them pull things through. The other thing that we've been trying to work with our leaders on is how do we help separate that which needs to be taken offline and learned, and that you could just find through performance support in your flow of work, so that you can take less out of people's brains and just allow them to have really great tools to look things up when they need it. So that's just another area of personal passion, because I think we spend way too much time on infusing knowledge that if you had really good tools, and we by no means have, we have a lot of way to go there, but trying to perfect those tools so I can get what I need when I need it is really important. And the leaders can coach to that. Like, you don't need to go to a training class, use your tools and get that information that you need. And I wanted to pick up on something that Carrie said. Nothing is more frustrating to employees when they have a development plan that they didn't get to execute on because the day-to-day work overtook the time that was needed for them to spend on their development outside of that information, to do my job. So I'd say we're really good at the training to do my job. And then the really strong leader also determines and is able to figure out, how do I also create space for this person to grow and develop per their development plan. So that's part of our leadership training, is you've got to be able to do that. If you create a development plan and then the employee is not able to execute it, you might as well have not put a plan in place, because you've done more damage than good, because you've made this promise or commitment, and then you're not really allowing them to follow through. So it's about being like super crisp on what's reasonable for us to develop, not to create development plans that can't be achievable. They've got to stretch people, but also be achievable, and then create the space and don't compromise on that.
Right. And, Barnaby, I think you may also bring a lens and a perspective too, because you work with so many Fortune 500 companies on what is the leader's role in the learning and development planning phase, and how do they deploy it. So what are you seeing in the market when it comes to the leader role?
Yeah, I think it's evolving. Again, a lot of learning and development organizations were very centralized and kind of asynchronous. I don't think everybody is as lucky to have a Lou and with sounds like a small army of people who are really engaging and developing that curricula. But with tools that we have, we're really allowing the line manager to engage. And I think it really comes down to how you lead and manage in this new environment. I mean, mentoring from afar and through Zoom is really difficult. And so I think one of the elements that I would add to, I think this making room for learning is super important. And there are a couple of ways that we can do that now that are somewhat innovative. One is having far more levels and ways of teaching a course. With many, many courses on a given subject, I think the corollary to making room for learning is meeting learners where they are. So people are at different levels and learn in different ways. And learning can be watching a video, it can be listening to an audio file, it can be much more text-based, it can be interactive, actually coding something and kind of getting to making things really work in code. And so many more levels, and again, giving the line manager the tools to do that. I think another big piece of how one can be a good manager, and it was touched on also of how often you need to connect with people, is to pay attention and to watch what people are doing. And Sam made the point around paying attention to searches, and that's another thing, that providing tools to actually make that possible, and give managers insights into what people are actually doing. I think that then also goes to how you curate the library. And I think a good analogy is kind of streaming movie or video services that have done such a good job in recommendations and saying, if you watched these shows or you binge watched this series, here are probably the things that you will like next. And so we've been working on with our data science team on actually doing that and being able to say, if you really like this course on this subject from this provider, here's the next level that maybe isn't from the same creator of educational content, but is relevant and is something that other people have benefited from. So, and then also within the making room for learning, the fact that people can digest things in smaller chunks. When people had to travel potentially to go to a classroom, you had to lock them in a room for 8 hours to justify the airfare and the time. And now we've brought the general cost down, but sort of the ancillary costs are eliminated. And for some people, making room might mean 5-10 minutes a day, and they can get through it, over a period, versus and really kind of digest slowly if that's what works well for them. And other people might reserve 4 hours a week or a month or whatever to do that deep dive, but it's meeting people where they are and giving managers an active role in that process, whereas in the past they may not have had that.
I agree. Is how do we, and technology, I think, has been a huge enabler of that as well. And I'm going to direct this question to Sam as well, because he's my technology guy on the call today. So Sam, I am curious on, given your line of business, there's a lot of crossover. How are your managers and the folks that you're working with helping to enable learning strategies and working cross-functionally? How is your business enabling this for your workers?
Well, from a technological perspective, giving more access to more data, it's a frequent request. Everybody, of course, wants more data, usually until the moment that they get it. Then they don't want it anymore. Okay, that's not what I meant. Or this doesn't make any sense. Or how can it be true that, like the concepts aren't necessarily there. So what we're trying to do is provide that kind of foundation that more organizationally mature organizations perhaps have this coming in. We're just building it. Like we're still trying to find our way that direction. Being able to provide multiple snapshots in time is valuable. I think of it like a flip book, like those old flip books where it's like the cartoon and you can see the person running. You can look at one picture of someone running, like on the cover of a magazine, and it conveys some meaning there. But when you can start to like see the multiple snapshots of, okay, this is how they're running, this is where they're going to, you get a lot more context and a lot more information that then managers can then use. So what we're trying to build really in terms of our own capability, technology, is the ability to convey that context and not just giving people what they're asking for, but giving people really what they need to make better decisions, which is ultimately what the ask is here. Like to enable management to manage is different than just like, okay, here's your course, here's your learning, here's your report, here's your request fulfilled. It's really looking a bit deeper at what's behind it.
Okay, great. No, I think that's a fantastic insight. And you're in that particular spot where you have to work cross-functionally all the time.
Yeah.
My next question, I'm going a little bit off script, but we talked about this one in some previous conversations, is working cross-functionally and aligning learning to different lines of businesses. So Lou and Carrie, I might put you on the spot on this one, but Lou, we had talked earlier about how you've had so much crossover with recruiting and staying aligned with that business. It seems like skills and learning are starting to become the backbone of everything in talent. Could you elaborate a little bit more of what you shared previously on skills and how you're crossing over with other business units?
Yeah, so our skills strategy, I mentioned we've built out a job taxonomy that we're calling Talent GPS to help provide visibility to the different roles in the company that really use similar skills, but may be part of different job families. So right now our talent acquisition team is working on really helping people understand the profile of the job, the skills that are required. And then our team is building out skill pathways that could help you self-service. And ultimately, within the next couple of years, we hope that we'll also be able to have gigs that would help us get work done at the company, but also give people the ability to apply what I learned to real work. Because I think that's the one thing that employees will often share with us is that I've acquired this skill, but I don't have something to apply it to that would get me that next opportunity. And we all know as HR learning professionals, if you don't use it, you lose it. So we're really trying to look at how can we provide those opportunities that get work done for the business and provide development for the individuals. And then we're also real connected to our HR business partners and the business on strategic workforce planning and what are the critical skills needed as they make decisions around, and we help them make those decisions. Our team, talent acquisition business partners, on when will you need the skill? How present is the skill? Do you buy the skill, borrow the skill? Is it something that we build or a combination thereof? So we've begun that journey over the last 12 to 15 months. And it's a new muscle for us in terms of really thinking about critical roles and getting all the players together. But it's really exciting work where we're working as a cross-functional HR organization.
And Carrie, how is that crossing over? You have that lens of the CHRO, and I'm sure having to cross over everyone to make sure it's all aligned. I'd love to hear.
It's a daunting and a great vantage point all at the same time, right? I get to see everything, and oh my gosh, I get to see everything. So it's kind of a little bit of both. But I think that a couple of things I just want to make, building on what Lou had said, and my other colleagues here, our aspiration at Mazar is we're instilling that we want to become a school of excellence where we reconsider our office locations as campuses for learning. Very aspirational endeavor, especially when people say, right, okay, it's a campus for learning. But I think it directs us with that mentality that speaks to what you're asking about, Jackie, which is that cross-functionality, breaking down the silos, looking more universally, considering things non-segmented that have broad appeal and impact and relevance, et cetera. So I think that reorientation is helpful to keep us pointing at that direction. Some of the things that we've been doing, creative learning opportunities. For example, this afternoon, we actually have a homegrown partner panel. So we have individuals who've grown up within the firm and have excelled to the highest levels of leadership. It's a disguised way of providing learning in how to navigate your career, what the instances are along the way, giving some advice and coaching. So these disguised learning opportunities we're embedding across the firm without functional or departmental consideration. Also, the social aspect. One of our recent programs, we incorporated a social aspect, which we leveraged Zoom breakout rooms where we had leaders networking with the cohort, small subgroups of a cohort cross-functionally, so that you get not only the ability to tap into some apprenticeship learning, some coaching, but you're building your network. So again, breaking down the silos and building out in that regard. So I think it is, Barnaby had written down that, we are meeting people where they are, and we're trying to get to that and be creative in all different kinds of learning opportunities, so that almost in certain ways, you don't feel like we have to make the room, it just occurs. And we can balance that where we have to make the room for things that seem more traditionally oriented in that way.
And it's almost like learning in the flow of work and how this all can fit. It just happens magically and no one even realizes it's happening. But for those of us on the call that are trying to think through logically on how to roll this out, and I think we have a few minutes left, so I'll open this one up to everyone on our panel. What's your number one piece of advice for folks that may be joining on our discussion today on rolling out a successful learning project? Just number one item to keep in mind and a few comments around why. So let's start, I'll start Barnaby, Lou, Carrie, Sam, and then end with Christian. So Barnaby, how about you first?
Sure. I'm a strong believer in the agile software development methodology. And for those who aren't familiar with it, really one of the core tenets is experimentation. And so I think that as you're rolling something like this out, don't go off for 6 months and come up with the perfect plan with an extensive curriculum that covers every single employee. Start small. Start with a few employees and a few courses, and ask them. Plus, people love to be asked their opinion and be part of the beginning of something. And so, small experiments, the most lightweight, cheapest experiment that will give you the most data on what actually works for people. And to that point about meeting them where they are, well, how do you know where they are? You ask them, and then try things and see how the assessments work out, and then build from there.
Okay, Lou.
So I would build on that because my two favorite sayings are go small to go big, go slow to go fast. And so Barnaby spoke to the small. When I mean go slow to go fast, it's like engage the right people, spend a little bit of time doing that front end analysis that you need to do, because if you do it, you're going to have a greater likelihood of nailing it and getting to the results that you want. If you just bang it through to get it done quickly, you're likely to have missed something. So not talking about taking ages, but just take a hot minute at the beginning to really determine what it is that you're going after and start small. And those two things working together usually lead to great outcomes.
Yep. Get the right stakeholders involved, have the few conversations that might help prepare you for your path. Carrie, what about you?
Yeah, I would say there's two things that jump out at me. I would say I'm a big proponent of why recreate the wheel. So if there's something out there that you can look at and piece together and take a bit of this and a bit of this and bring it together, I think sometimes we we hurt ourselves in trying to create this innovative, brand new start from scratch. And when we really could be taking bits and pieces and make it the right new thing for us. So I'm always advocating for what pieces are out there that we can talk about and socialize. And then I think the other thing is just, leveraging what is readily available. And sometimes the simplest of things we may dismiss as being not really learning opportunities, but in actuality they are. And one case in point is we have a subscription with LinkedIn Learning as an organization, and we have a number of other things, but it's just a simple way to put relevant topics that are consumable, that are build upon each other and keep momentum, as Barnaby had suggested at, where, object in motion stays in motion. And while we're creating other instances, people are very satisfied and getting opportunities from that.
All right, and Sam?
Well, adding on to everything here, all great answers thus far. To Carrie's point about don't build it if you don't have to. In so many cases where we used to have to, we now don't have to, because of massive catalogs like GoOne has. We use that whenever possible to be able to meet needs faster than we've ever been able to meet them. For the cases that we're designing something from scratch, biggest piece of advice: if you can't prove that one person learned from it, you're not going to be able to prove that more people learned from it. Really scaling down to that agile that Barnaby was talking about, or Lou, of how it is we go slow to go fast. No one wants to test something with one person, but until you can prove that it works with one person, which is usually a pretty easy test to do, you can't prove anything once you scale it. So scaling too early is it's something we're always getting pressure to do, but it's a hard way to find success, I'll say.
I like that. Don't recreate the wheel. Make sure you test. Test it before you launch it, right? Which I think can go along with technology as well in your role, Sam, with any large rollout. But Christian, let's round it out with you. What's your number one piece of advice to the audience?
I would say my number one piece of advice is that, and I do see the HR function do this really well, and that's be humble and engage. Understand that you might have a really good plan, but you do want to go ahead and check yourself and engage learning at the grassroots. Once you put a good plan in place and it's being executed, take the time and effort. I think Lou alluded to this, to go out there and study specific team leaders, teams, parts of your organization, and try to understand how is it being experienced, what is the value being derived from it, and how can we potentially improve it. If you continuously do that, you're going to be able to build on something that has inherent value in and of itself, but it's going to continue to grow, and it'll have that ultimate value that kind of Sam just alluded to. If you can't help one, you can't help any. And I think that's how I would close the loop.
Wow. Well, I learned a tremendous amount from all of you today. I want to thank you so much for your time and for bringing so much value to this discussion. I think I'm going to take back, I've already got a list of things I've documented that I'll take back just to my team, but hopefully everyone on the air right now also gained a lot of value out of this too. So before we end out, I know we had a quick Q&A from Esther that said, and don't forget to take your survey at the end of this. She's also going to provide directions in just a second around getting your CPA credit, etc. So that's a really important thing, I know too, as you're joining these calls. But also, if you have any other questions and we want to continue the dialogue, I know my team is happy to help continue that discussion around learning strategies, how to execute on engagement, or even discuss more around retention and how to build a successful learning plan. And if you'd like to reach out to us, we can be reached at contenthubupgrades@adp.com. Esther, I'm going to turn it back over to you to share any other closing tips for our attendees today.
I'd like to thank our presenters as well as all of you for joining us today. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording will be available on the hr.com website within 24 hours. The webcast credit will show in your hr.com account within 2 business days, and we'll also send you an email with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, all.
Thanks so much.